Well, great. We had a few more people come in the last 1 minute, so it's good that we waited. Hope you all had the time to look at the cartoon slide here. It's an unusual start to how we generally do webinars, but it really covers the day-to-day story of an admin or anyone who manages Salesforce as a platform at your company. Now, what happens is with changing business needs, we are generally bound to make changes to either existing customizations or look at adding new customizations. And it will really ease our day-to-day work if we have clear answers to few questions like how can I safely change a pick list, or how can I identify unused customizations and delete them without worrying. And if I, as someone who's managing the platform, can be alerted to any changes that have a huge impact on my system, or how can I effectively manage change in a complex org. Now, what we have done at Strongpoint, we have spoken to a lot of trailblazers like yourselves, and we've helped them find answers to the questions that I just said. And our purpose today for the webinar is to share a small bite of the larger cleanup pie. Help you walk through some of the key reasons of why technical debt or why cleanup in general is important, and strategies that could help achieve this, and a demo of how you can do this yourselves. Um, I am Simranjeet Singh, ex Salesforce, worked as an account executive for almost 3 years prior to joining Strongpoint. I'll be on the call to help answer any questions. You can keep posting them in the chat window, as we speak. Your main host for the session today is Rick Rosler. He's a crucial member of our customer success team, and he brings, direct Salesforce admin experience. I'll let him introduce himself further, and he can walk you through on the slides in the demo. So over to you, Rick.
All right, thank you, Simranjeet. This is Rick Rosler, and I was that guy who changed the pick list value on the cartoon slide when I first started my Salesforce experience about 12 years ago. So it resonates with me. As Simranjeet said, technical debt in Salesforce is a typical problem. I'm assuming that most of you are familiar with the concept of technical debt. Salesforce itself talks about this a lot. It's pretty common in larger and older Salesforce orgs where customizations have built upon themselves over time. And the end result is typically a reduced capability of the Salesforce team to quickly meet new and changing business needs. So what we're going to do today is talk about how Strongpoint helps identify the sources of technical debt in your org, and how we can help you clean these up. So how do things get this way? There's typically 3 reasons, but a lot of it is directly related to really the key strength of Salesforce, which is the ability to easily and quickly customize an org to meet business requirements. However, a lot of time those customizations are done without a lot or any documentation. If there is documentation, it may not be extremely well organized or contained, and typically a lot of customization knowledge is carried around inside people's heads as tribal knowledge. As orgs grow, many people become involved. Some are internal to your org. You may hire external consultants who will come in and make changes, again, with more or less documentation of these changes. And finally, good news and bad news. The good news is that Salesforce developers and admins are typically in high demand. Bad news is that may result in turnover in the org, and especially if a lot of the knowledge of how the org has been customized, is tribal, then that tribal knowledge may walk out the door. So these are the main scenarios that we see when we talk to customers. The Strongpoint product is built on a foundation of automated documentation. So we scan and document all of the metadata items in your org. So that is all of the definitions of custom objects, custom fields, reports, list views, classes, triggers, and so forth. But not only do we document the definitions of those metadata items, but we also document all of the interdependencies between those items. So fields that are referenced in classes, fields that are used as filters in reports, and so forth. All of these are stored as custom objects in Salesforce, which makes it easy to do reporting and research, and I'll show a little bit of that in a few minutes. In addition, Strongpoint helps to keep your org in order by doing nightly scans of the org that identify any changes that have occurred in the last 24 hours. Change logs capture the who, what, when, and how details of all of these changes. And when this is coupled with Strongpoint change request functionality, it helps you focus only on the changes that do not comply with your company policies. So a lot of changes are made all the time. Some of these are known and expected. Some of them may be surprises. And so we try to help keep the surprises under control and visible. And finally, we have comprehensive reporting capabilities about these changes so that you can prove that change policies are being followed. And typically this is proving to like auditors, as an example. All right, so I'm going to jump into a short demo. And in this demo, I'm going to focus on three things. So first, are capabilities that will help you to identify unused custom fields. In general, these capabilities can be used to identify other unused types of customizations. You may have installed a managed package long ago that's no longer being used. And so you can kind of use the same process for those types of things. A common question that we get is, how do I know if a field is being used as a filter in a report? Because if I delete that field and it's a filter, then it's going to change the results that are reported. And if the report is used by finance, for example, that filter may be critical and so needs additional scrutiny. So we'll talk about that. And then finally, I'll give you a quick overview of some of the features we've built in to help you manage a cleanup project kind of from start to finish. And so let us begin. So what you're going to see mostly here is the same list view. What I've done is I've created a few different list views with different filtering options just to make this go a little bit quicker and reduce the amount of information that's on each page. But essentially, this is a list view that shows metadata items that are custom fields in the org. This is a demo org, so there's not a lot in it, but this should give you a flavor of what is possible. On this particular list view, I show custom fields in the first column, and then the next 4 columns give you some information on dependencies that Strongpoint has documented, either for reports, list views, and dashboards, which are in the second column, dependencies to classes, triggers, flows, and things like that, which are in the third column under scripts, dependencies to workflows and approvals, and finally, dependencies to page layouts. I'm not going to talk too much about page layouts. Most fields end up on one or more layouts. Sometimes this is important to know because a certain field might be of interest to a particular business constituency that uses a particular layout. So I just want to focus for right now on one of the last fields here, the delivery status field. So this is a pick list value that has a lot of dependencies. So it's used on many reports. It's used in the account controller Apex class. It's used in a workflow rule and an approval rule, and of course it appears in many places. So whenever you see custom fields or any other customization that has a preponderance of dependencies, that you know kind of automatically that this is going to need a lot of scrutiny if it's going to be changed at all. So for example, if we wanted to add a value to this delivery status pick list, we would know that we need to look in several different places to understand what the impact of that additional value might be. So I've taken the same list view now, and I've added a few more columns that will help us with cleanup. The first column I've added is the percent populated field. So this tells you of all of the records for that particular object that exist, how many of those records have this particular field populated with any value whatsoever. And you can see that in this org, there are many fields where the record is not populated at all. Because these records that have 0% are not populated, they will have neither a date last used nor a parent last updated date, and that's why those two columns are blank. In the Strongpoint product, the date last used field very specifically means that if a field has field history tracking turned on, then we're going to populate date last used with the most recent date from field history tracking. If field history tracking is not turned on, we use some related dates from the object records in order to try to triangulate on a most recently used date, and that's what's in the parent column. The next list view applies a filter, which is now going to filter for anything where the percent populated is less than 20%. So this is going to be our kind of first cut at fields that are interesting to clean up. Obviously, the 0% used fields are of interest, especially the fields that have no dependencies that we can see from this list view, other than the account, other than the page layouts. You can see here that there's two fields that we'll continue focusing on in the demo. This commission percentage field that seems to be rarely used. Records that have it populated seem to be fairly old. It is used on a report, and that's about it. There's also this company social media field that seems to be sparsely populated. We do have field history tracking turned on for that field, but it hasn't been touched since last June. Also only used on 2 reports and also a candidate for deprecation. In order to kind of focus things, I've now applied another filter that just gets rid of all of the 0% fields. In a real cleanup project, the 0% fields obviously would be of high interest. But for this demo, I just want to focus on these 2 fields that we just talked about. So again, low percent populated, seems like they haven't been used in a long time, not really used anywhere except for 1 or 2 reports. From here, these customizations are links, and they're links back to customization records in Strongpoint. So here I've opened up the company social media record that we've created. And when you open that, the default view is our dependency relationship diagram. So this provides a visual way to look at dependencies other than just from reports or list views. Here you can see the page layouts and the 2 reports that refer to the company social media field. Just as an aside, you can continue drilling down into these dependencies to find out, what these are dependent on. So, for example, this East Region KPI report refers to these 5 custom fields. There's a lot of additional data that we provide that I'm not going to go into, a bunch of metadata detail, the actual raw data that's returned by the metadata API that, for example, shows the raw XML of the custom field, for example. And then the last thing that I wanted to show is that from any of these customization records, you can actually click the Go to Record button, and that will take you directly to the customization itself. So I click that, and now we're in the setup screen for this particular field. If it had been a report, it would take you to the report setup screen. If it were a class, it would take you into setup for the class and so forth. So it's a quick way to kind of navigate and get a lot of information when you need it. I mentioned that these fields were used in these reports, and typically of interest is, again, whether this field is used as a filter in the report. So in our scans, excuse me, we capture all of that data. And here I've created a list view of every report in the system, along with all of the actual filters that are in the report. So this tells you the field that it's filtering on. It tells you the specific field criteria. For this one, it's whatever this field is, it's less than 180 days old, and so forth. So from this view, we can quickly determine, if I type in the part of the API name for the company social media field, we can see that there are no results here, which means that the company social media field is a column on the 2 reports, but not a filter. Whereas if we look at the commission percentage field, which has a API name of commission rate, you can see that is here, right? So there's a filter that says if the commission rate's greater than 40, only show those records on the report that we saw before. So we may be able to deprecate this field, but it will require a little bit extra scrutiny. And then finally, in this final list view, we see kind of the same information. I've stripped off all of the dependency fields except for the report fields that we just looked at. And I've added some fields that can help us manage a cleanup project. So I'm just going to start typing some things in here. So this is the commission. This is the commission percentage field. It's used as a filter. So needs investigation to see whether that report is actually being used anymore. This one essentially has no dependencies that seem critical. The cleanup classification field is one that we provide. Customers typically use it to kind of identify a cleanup project. So we're going to call this the Spring 2020 Cleanup Project. Every field that you want to look at can have a status, and we provide some out-of-the-box statuses. For the commission field, I'm going to choose under investigation because we need to do this investigation. For the company social media, I'm just going to mark it to be cleaned up because it seems pretty safe. I mentioned at the very beginning of the call, change requests and change logs. So from this list view, we can add customizations to a change request, which I'll show in a minute. I've kind of pre-created this change request called unused field cleanup for spring 2020. And I'm going to save that. And now I'm going to open the change request. So any planned changes for your org can be documented in a change request like this. If you're using a system like Jira, we offer Jira integration so you can actually create the change request from Jira and never really have to get into the Strongpoint change request itself. But here you can see that those two fields have been added as customizations to the change request. We can see directly from the change request the dependency relationship diagram here for each of these. There's an impact and analysis tab for that basically gives you a written summary of the dependencies that we've found. So here we're saying that both of these fields seem to be dependent on, have dependencies with list views and or reports, and it shows you what those are. And so it requires some degree of investigation before they are before they're removed. When I talked about change enablement at the beginning, I said that whenever we detect a change, we create a change log, and we can reconcile those change logs against these change requests to determine if they're compliant or not. And so what that would look like, so I'm going to pretend now that we've gotten this change request approved, right? So we leverage the Salesforce approval engines. We've gotten it approved, and now we've decided that we can delete these, so we've deleted them. Once the deletion occurs, and we go back and rescan, if we went back to like our company social media field, we'd get a new change log entry for whatever the date that the field was deleted. The compliant indicator would be a green flag, and it would reference over here in the related change request, the change request that we just looked at, because when the change log sees the approved change request, it says, aha, I'm expecting that, so therefore it's compliant. Anything on the change logs that you see as flagged red are indications that changes were made that might be surprising or extraordinary, and you may want to go back and follow up on those. Again, each change log will tell you who changed it, how it was changed, when it was changed, to provide you some data for that detective work. And so with that, we've looked at basic tool set for how to identify unused fields, how to leverage the dependency reports to determine what the dependencies are, and specifically if a filter was used, if a field was used as a filter, and then an overview of the tools that allow you to manage a cleanup project, create change requests, and then once the cleanup occurs, to create compliant change logs that will follow your business process. And so with that, I am going to conclude my prepared remarks and see if there's any questions.
So there is one question, Rick, and someone is asking an idea of how do we measure usage rate for fields?
So the percent populated usage. So let's pretend that it's a field on the account. So we count the total number of account records in your org, and then we count for that particular field how many of those fields have non-null values. So they're populated with something, right? And the ratio of those is the percent populated.
Okay, and the next one is, apart from fields, are there any other customizations that we can identify using the tool?
So the answer in general is yes. You can use this for any kind of customization. For example, so let's go back to my example of somebody a long time ago installed a managed package. What we see in a lot of the older Salesforce orgs is that over time, managed packages have been installed, but they've fallen into disuse. So as an example, you can run reports on objects that belong to managed packages, fields that belong to managed packages, classes that belong to managed packages, reports that belong to managed packages, and again, looking at the same kinds of information. So for example, date last used on an Apex class is defined to be the last time that class was triggered or run. So if all of the classes that belong in a managed package haven't been run, in over 6 months, then it's a pretty good idea that it's no longer being used. But the short answer is every customization, and there are over 100 metadata types that we catalog, all have the same type of usage information that you can query and report on for cleanup.